Lazy Booking, like, subscribe, follow A2D Radio. Let's go.
That's my baby.
I'm dying.
That's my baby.
We're going at it at 110%.
I just want 5 minutes of happiness, please. Just give me 5 minutes.
And they scored. They did it.
Left, beat left.
What the hell was that?
Oh yeah. What the fuck are you talking about?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Lazy Booking live on A2DRadio.com. We are back with the franchise, Shane Douglas.
What's up, guys?
Hey, part 3. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty last time, and my guy right here, Shane, awesome man right here, coming back. We're going to give you the rest of the conversation, and there's so much to talk about with Shane today, so we're looking forward to that. But we got to pay some bills here, and Andy, who are we paying bills today with?
All right. So first of all, we are brought to you by the Counseling Center and Sunrise Detox. Many of our families deal with mental health and addiction issues. We're happy to support them. If you need help, please call them at 856-651-8117. We can't forget about Dr. Paul Vidal at Specialized Physical Therapy. Check him out on the web, specializedphysicaltherapy.com. He's got 2 locations in Burlington and Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Also, Body Check Wellness. Body Check Wellness is a line of products that promote wellness, balance, and recovery by using the full potential of hemp. They come in extracts, blends, gummies, and topicals. Use promo code A2D for 20% off your order at bodycheckwellness.com. We can't forget about Alan Foy of eXp Realty. Looking to buy or sell a home for a change in career and brokerage? Make sure you give him a call at 302-682-8820. Or check him out at alan.foy@exprealty.com. And we would be remiss if we forgot to bring up A2D memberships, $9.99 a month right here on YouTube. You can be on the shows with us, members-only streams, shout-outs, and weekly sports picks from our friends at Money Pot Podcast.
And I'm going to tell you, with Money Pot Podcast, if you guys follow, if you subscribe, and you take those guys' information, I'm telling you right now, you're going to make your $9.99 a month back very, very, very quickly. And he just dropped off already. And I'll tell you right now, Shane, I don't know. Maybe it's me in areas. He's back already. I'll tell you what, Andy, I don't know. Maybe it's me. We had the conversation with Shane a couple weeks ago. And we talked about his intro to WWE and those promos that he cut. And Andy had a lot more enthusiasm the first time, Shane. I feel like Vince is somewhere in the background helping him go through that whole bill pay there. I don't know. I don't know.
To be honest with you, my screen never came back from the video. So I was staring at darkness.
Lots of I'm not talking about you dropping off. I'm talking about the energy and the enthusiasm.
Yeah, but I was just kind of going off the top of my head. I had nothing on this side here.
I got you. Well, listen, wonderful to have Shane back for part 3, and it's only fitting, Shane, that we have you. I guess we didn't expect it to work that way, but it worked out. We got part 3 here with Shane Douglas, the franchise ECW legend, somebody that we love very much in this area and all over the pro wrestling industry. Very happy to have you, Shane, and we appreciate your time. And Shane, it's very ironic. We had you for Father's Day. Now we have you for 4th of July weekend. It's almost like a holiday reoccurrence at this point.
Yeah, always in a festive mood when we're here, right? Great stuff. Got the burgers and brats.
Let's go, right? We're bringing the festive mood. So, hey, happy 4th of July to everybody out there. We appreciate you guys taking the time to join us here on A2D Radio, to join us with the franchise Shane Douglas, myself, Andy Ritter, Mr. Ritz down here. We last left off, Shane. We went through a phenomenal story going through your WWE tenure. And where we kind of had the issues that kind of came up was when we were starting to get into, you were getting ready to now go into your return to ECW. So we're going to bring the same poll question back, the same conversation point that we brought back, because we want to make sure that we can hear it all, because I know there was a lot of insight that we could pick the bits and pieces there. But the topic of conversation for the show to kick us off is the manager and valet role in pro wrestling is a lost art. Agree, disagree? Shane, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. First of all, I grew up watching classy Freddie Blassie, the Grand Wizard, Lou Albano, even Arnold Skolin, the babyface manager, right? And so they were integral to the matches. There's a reason they're out there, right? As we all know, it's not just okay. We got to hire somebody, give them an extra paycheck. They're out there because there's times when the matches, especially in the old school, right? You grab a hold, and there's a lot of the catch can style that I call, more competitive style that would sometimes, especially by today's comparisons, excuse me, what fans might be boring or whatever. God forbid you grab a hold for 2 seconds. So those at that time, that's when the managers or the valets would come to life at ringside and do their things. On my Triple Threat podcast last week, we did for the first time we did this on the show, by the way, went back and watched the 45-minute Broadway with Terry, the first one leading into the three-way dance. And I hadn't watched that in probably 25, 26 years, if not longer. And I said very little because I was so glued watching Terry. And Sherry Martel was at ringside for that one. And, boy, just perfect. I mean, as soon as, we'd be doing our stuff or Terry would be selling or beating my ass or whatever, grab something and poof, Sherry would come to life, do her thing. At the very end of that segment, leading towards the go-home, Paul Heyman came out, then the Bad Breed came out, and Sherry, out of no place, jumps past the camera, like out of the camera view, right on the Bad Breed, and they beat her down, which you couldn't do today.
Oh, no.
But it was so perfect and so seamless that it fit into the match. And that's what the reason for a manager or a valet out there. Of course, ECW made spades of that, right? Taking, from that, then going to, from Sherry to Francine, Beulah and Peaches and, Kamana Wanalea. There were so many of those beautiful women at ringside. Let's face it, weren't bad on the eyes, but they were also damn capable, right? And that's the point that gets lost in all this argument today, objectifying them or whatever. No, they were a damn integral part of the chain. They were a link in the chain. And so to have grown up watching that and the things that lured this young kid, snot-nosed kid, to be into wrestling, then utilized by me once I learned my craft in the business, to now see it sanitized out or very, very scantily used. And for the most part, when you do see that manager or valet at ringside, they're really not integral to their match. They're just sort of a body standing there and used for whatever reason. I don't know why. I don't know why it's gone that way, and I can't understand, why. It seems to me and all of my peers that if it was done back then, we can't do it now. And, to me, that's just inane because there's so much of what we did and they did back before me that was so perfectly and well done. Like Bill Watts used to say, the formula works. It ain't rocket science. So if you use that formula in my long career, I've never seen the formula utilized properly and it not work. So I'm sort of remiss as to how we've gotten to this place where, valets and or managers are secondary, just sort of tertiary to the equation, if at all used.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the business now, right? And to me, the term valet is completely gone. That's absolutely gone because, and I am a firm believer in the equal opportunity for the female pro wrestler and this and that.
Absolutely.
However, some people thrive in other roles, and there's so many different roles. You could be a referee. You can make a career for yourself. Look at how many referees have made careers for themselves, right?
That's right.
You could be a referee. You could be, an announcer, whatever it is. You could be a backstage correspondent, whatever it is, and you could still thrive and make a career for yourself if that's not your thing. Look at Josh Matthews in Impact Wrestling right now, right? Guy who did Tough Enough, didn't cut it, was a smaller guy, and for whatever reason wasn't able to cut it. And to me, I really enjoy listening to him when he does commentary and he does an insight on different things. I think Josh Matthews is a very talented guy. He's found a niche, and now he's worked in a backstage producer role and different things. There's always opportunities. The valet role is lost, and I almost feel like again, I'm an equal opportunist for women to be able to have the opportunity to thrive. I love seeing Charlotte Flair. I love seeing Britt Baker and all these different women thrive in the role. However, certain people can thrive in the same role. Example I'm going to use here, Lana. Amazing when Rusev was coming up and Rusev's initial run. And then the need to now we have to put everybody in the ring. We have to give everybody an opportunity in the ring. I feel like you almost get lost of the art of it. And, one of your guys, right? One of the guys that you worked very closely with, he's one of the exceptions who's managed to find, another niche or create a whole other legacy. And that's obviously Paul Heyman, right? The Paul Heyman legacy is he might be the only guy that I can really think of at this moment in the game. Maybe Taz. You could throw Taz out there, but Taz has a lot of time still that he has to prove. But you look at what Paul Heyman's done as a manager, outside of everything else he's contributed to the business. And to me, I put Paul Heyman up there with a Bobby the Brain Heenan. He can create that heat, promote, right? That's the whole role of the manager. When you look at the valet, he can tell the story. Listen, I'll tell you this, Shane, and I don't know, you've probably seen WrestleMania 30 when The Undertaker lost, right? To Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
One of the most memorable parts of that is the facial expressions, the reactions from Paul Heyman at ringside. The moment he loses and he hops in the ring. But he's one of the only, literally, off the top of my head, one of the only guys I can think of. But there was a time where you had guys like Slick, you had Sherry Martel out there, you had Miss Elizabeth, you had Bobby the Brain Heenan, where they were able, different personalities, Jimmy Hart, different personalities to fit different characters to create different kinds of heat or to create different kinds of energy behind baby faces for people to get behind them. And it's such a lost art now because it almost feels like everybody has to get in the ring. You look at WWE now, like you look at Shayna Baszler and you look at Nia Jax, and they have, what is his name? I can't even think. Reginald, right? And he's a very talented, very athletic guy. But again, it's a guy who we have to throw him in the ring every now and then now. And instead of just, if this is your role, this is your role. If it's not, then you're an in-ring performer. I miss having managers or valets, and it's such a different. You had Francine, and that's where we're going to end up transitioning in. So I'm going to let Andy chime in on this too before we move on to it. But you had Francine, and you talk about, to me, you had Sherry Martel, right? And then you leave and you come back, and man, you talk about the ideal pairing. You and Francine was, to me, take my money. To watch you guys and that dynamic, whether it was backstage cutting a promo or in the ring, take my money. You guys were money. It was perfect.
Yeah, which is what wrestling's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Andy? And I do think it's a lost art. And I see Pete chiming in saying it's a lost art in WWE. There's still valets and managers on the indies. And I think it's
they all get in the ring, though. I go to a lot of indie shows. They all end up in the ring.
Exactly.
It always happens.
I think you can't just limit it to WWE, right? You look at somebody like AEW, and they've got literally legends sitting on the outside. Some are contributing, some are not. It's like, why are you here? When we broke it down last week on In This Very Ring, how you've got all these older people, and it's great that they're there in a mentor role, but what are you actually contributing? Don't just be out there to be out there. Actually bring some value, bring some new dynamic to the match. Because at that point, I don't need you. I don't need to see you on my screen. You don't need to get in the ring. You don't need to whatever. But, to Chrome's point, Paul Heyman, he elevates a match, and you think back to people like Teddy Long when Rodney Mack first came in to play. Teddy Long was a great manager. That's my first experience with Teddy Long. Obviously he was around much earlier than that. But, and Taz now, having people out there just to be out there doesn't make any sense anymore. If you're not doing anything, why are you standing there? Right? Do something. I
love Jake the Snake, Andy and Shane, but And Jake the Snake, when you talk about promo, I just don't. It's not the same magic at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're grasping. We're putting people in manager roles who aren't, in my opinion, aren't trained to be managers. There's certain people that fit that role. That's what they should have done. Built their legacy on. And it's a lost art, Shane. I don't get it.
Well, to me, several things. First of all, what you were talking about a second ago, Dave, with all these multiple rules. That goes back in some fashion, fits into the puzzle that Bill Watts used to say, right? At Thanksgiving dinner, nobody wants just a big pile of turkey. By putting that in there and having a Slick at ringside or having a Sherry Martel at ringside or a Miss Elizabeth, that now allows you as the writer, if you're the writer in the office, to add texture to that story, okay? Because now we've got these two guys in the ring that are doing this and flying all over the place. But now we want to put texture. Look at WrestleMania 3, right? That massive, massive stage. Well, there's 93,000 people in that building. Not all 93,000 are be eyes on the two guys in the ring just alone. And when those guys do something, you want the valets or the managers at ringside to be integral doing something else. In other words, you want to expand that stage. There's a Chekhov wrote about the something done. Slipped in my brain for a second, but Chekhov, one of the greatest writers of all time, talked about if you're going to include it in the story, if it's going to be on the stage, if you're doing a stage presentation, and there's a water pitcher back there on the fireplace mantle, utilize that. Don't just put it there to pretty up the set. Utilize it. Chekhov's gun. And so same thing with valets and managers. And I think, like you said, a perfect segue into my returning to ECW. We'll get back into this in some way when we talk about my return to ECW because of the pairing of me and Francine together.
Yeah, and so we can segue into it right now. Let's talk about it, right? So obviously Francine worked with the Pitbulls early on. You guys end up getting paired together. So can you tell us how that marriage kind of came about?
Yeah, I came back, as you can imagine, for me, returning to ECW is like coming home, especially after that 6-month Twilight Zone. I was just so thrilled to be back. And I came back the first week. I wasn't even working. I just flew myself in because they had a couple events that weekend. They were doing New York, Lost Battalion Hall, and the ECW Arena the next night. And I just wanted to be around the boys. I wanted to be around the fans and get back soaked into that ECW. So the first night I'm in Lost Battalion Hall, and I'm like a little giddy kid, right? So earlier in the day, there's some old balding guy yelling at these old ladies setting chairs up. Not like that, do it like that. Hey, you get off your ass and get over here and put the – man, what, this guy's being an asshole. I didn't even know who it was. I figured someone was bullying. So I'm standing behind a pillar, and I said, shut the fuck up, Baldy. Being the franchise gremlin, right? And he comes walking over and big scowl on his face. He hands on his hips. He goes, "Do you know who I am?" I'm like, "No." "Do you know who I am?" And it turned out to be Steve Carroll. And so that started the night off, right? So I'm in one of my moods of having fun, right? So later that night after the show, great show, and afterwards everybody's doing promos, and Francine's doing hers with the Pitbulls. The first thing I noticed was, first of all, Freddie in the dressing room was great. She's like a little schoolmarm, glasses on, reading her books, and sitting there meek as a mouse, and dressed in all this leather and everything, right? I'm going, hey, there's something not adding up there. So she got up to do the promos, and she looked so out of her element. She was shaking when she was talking. Her voice was breaking, and she looked scared to death. And so just instinctively, like I had done for me, I pulled her aside and went over behind a pillar, and I said, look, just relax. Nobody's scared of us. Just have fun with it. Be yourself, blah, blah, blah. Well, Paul later told me when he paired Francine and I, he had noticed that. He had seen me take her under my wing and, start to give her some advice and some pointers. And she did calm down a bit on camera. And that's where Paul conceived of the idea of putting us together. And so that was how it started, was that night and me taking her and showing her like I had done for me when I was much younger. And Paul conceived of the idea of putting us together in some way. And, I don't know if he ever saw the full value in it, but the chemistry was brilliant between us.
Yeah, I mean, the value is undeniable, and obviously it's one of the more iconic pairings at that time. Andy?
So where are we? Okay. So you pair with Francine, right? You just win the television title, okay? And then the idea comes back to reform the triple threat with Chris Candido and Brian Lee.
Yes.
And then you're also are you also doing the feud with Tommy Dreamer and Beulah during the same time?
Yes. As soon as Paul put us together, Beulah was another one that was so compelling. The litmus test that I always have for stars is when there's somebody on screen and you can't take your eyes off of them. And Beulah had that. Even though she was young and green, when she got on camera, she evoked such an innocence that she looked like the baby doe, like being led to the slaughter, and you couldn't take your eyes off her because she was so magnetic. And Paul wanted to figure out ways to get them involved that didn't entail them being wrestlers, but still you could have the action and in some way, I hate to use the term because it's so overused, but organic, right? Now you have my valet and Tommy's valet now getting in there and rolling around. They're not, doing wrestling spots per se. Of course, Beulah did throw in the moonsault that she had worked on to do, and broke her nose that night. That's the thing that always got the girls over with me, was that they were tough as nails, right? Like Beulah came back, nose bleeding, everything, never once complained. When Franny had to take the big bump through the table, there was no concern. I was more concerned that she was going to get hurt. But she said, "No, I'll do it." And they were always gung ho about it. And considering how green they were and young in the business, and being put on that stage, I can't imagine, like with Francine. Like I said a second ago, we'll segue into some of the question of the week, intersplice that in. Francine was a little over a year in the business and had really not done much. Worked a couple times here and there. It wasn't like she was working every single day or anything in that year. I can't imagine at that same stage of my career, me suddenly being put with the world heavyweight champion and in the main event spotlight. And, oh, by the way, don't fuck up. That's a lot of pressure. And boy, Franny handled it in spades.
Yeah, she really did. And again, you guys became such an ideal pairing. And I think she really flourished in that role. I think you guys, the play back and forth between you guys and being able to really complement each other, again, plays into what we talked about. You look at today and it's such a lost art. But going into that new, the return of the triple threat faction, so to speak, you have a guy like a Chris Candido. You have you eventually bring in Bam Bam Bigelow, and I was a hardcore ECW guy. I'll be honest, I completely forgot about Brian Lee even being a part of it. To me, I look at that faction and I see Bam Bam Bigelow, I see yourself as the figurehead, and I see Chris Candido. And when you look at it, right, it's one of those three guys that seem to be not totally opposite, but you really are. You're very different people, but the dynamic was so fantastic. And then you add in, we talk about Tammy Sitch at that point, right? And the heat that ended up developing with Francine. There was just a very special vibe about this iteration of the triple threat. And can you talk about what that time was like, working with those guys, working with, obviously, again, you have Tammy Sitch, who comes from this amazing run from WWE. I mean, really, she's anointed. She's the internet queen at this point, right? 1995's most downloaded AOL person, whatever it was. Yeah. She comes in now at ECW, and that's another flag of credibility right there, another feather for credibility right there. Talking about people like yourself coming in, and then you had the guys like Benoit's, the Terry Funks, to really legitimize ECW. But can you talk about what it was like with that faction and working with those guys, Bam Bam Bigelow and Chris Candido, who, again, one of the guys who, in my opinion, I know a lot of people talk about him if they're a hardcore fan, but one of the most underrated and not talked about enough about his contributions to the wrestling business.
Yeah, I completely agree. In part because he died so young, but I think also because of the way he was utilized in the business and the way, quite frankly, that Chris portrayed himself. The no gimmicks needed I came up with. Taz and I were driving to West Middletown, New York one night, and I thought, Chris could do literally anything. and it was effortless for him. And I was always jealous of that because I always had to work hard at it, and I thought Chris always had what he called ha-ha, and it was the way he entertained himself in the ring. He would do the little humor spots and the curly shuffle and all those kind of things, and that's what made it fun for him in the ring. But I thought if he would just focus on that being a stone cold heel, he would do it astoundingly. He would do it way beyond anything anybody else would do because everything he did was that way. And so I went to him and I gave him this idea for no gimmicks in it because he's that good. He doesn't need a gimmick. And just to play that stone cold, and he did it for a few weeks, but he couldn't help himself. He couldn't help be him, right? And so eventually, interspersing the ha stuff back in, but yeah, he was phenomenal. Chris, and this is a true story. I've told it a million times. Chris would, often take naps in the dressing room, and he'd be over there sleeping for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, dead asleep. His music would be playing. He'd wake him up. He would jump up, wipe his eyes out, go to the ring, and give a 5-star performance. And you're like, how do you do that? Like, Jesus. But he was something special in the ring. And I think that his personality was such that he was just a good old guy, right? Just one of the kids down the block. And I don't think he ever saw himself as a star. And so never sort of, he wanted to evoke that. He didn't want to stop being the kid down the block. And, and it's a shame because I think Chris would have gone leaps and bounds beyond anything any of us at the time were doing the business. And if he were still alive right now, I think he'd be like 47 years old. So, he died so young. But when I first came back from WWF, Paul put me through this sort of gauntlet. At the time, it miffed me a bit, but looking back, it was good for me because it was almost like he was making me earn my spot back in the business in the ECW, which was great in hindsight because there was no pressure. I was just going out and having good matches each night with whoever he's putting me with. And when he then put this triple threat together, and that allowed him to put all that spotlight on Chris and Bam Bam. You mentioned Brian Lee. Brian Lee was there. I was always a fan of his work, great big guy. And we, after Chris and Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko left, excuse me, the faction was too valuable to just let it roll away. And so I looked around the ring and Candido instantly because I was such a fan for his work. And then I thought, well, me and Benoit Malenko were roughly the same size. So what if we add a big guy to it? And Brian Lee fit that bill. Brian, to this day, I don't think I've seen him since. He just didn't show up on weekend. And I've never, ever heard the story as to where he went. Did he quit? Was he fired? I have no idea. And right shortly around that same time, if it wasn't the same weekend, it was very tight. In walks Bam Bam Bigelow to the company. And, I had known Scott from previous and, been friendly. Weren't friends, like best of friends that traveled together or anything. But I thought, oh, my God, here's this big tattooed freak that can do anything. Perfect. Put him together. And that period where Paul was putting me through the gauntlet, that's when he put the world tag titles on Chris and Bam Bam and the television title on Chris. And then at that point, I think he saw the value of now putting me back into the world title contention. At that brief moment, the triple threat held all the gold in the ECW. It was sort of a coup. And,
I loved it.
And all that legitimacy. We didn't need to have it long, but just the fact that we could put that stamp on the triple threat and say we own it all really validated the triple threat. Yeah.
And it did. You guys were such a unique faction. Again, when you talk about perception, right, and you talk about the group and you see the dynamic between you guys and you have a Bam Bam Bigelow, it's almost like the enforcer, so to speak, the big guy in the background, and then you bring in two of the most beautiful women in the industry. To me, that's it's a legitimization of that group to say, listen, we have the gold, we have the women, we have the size, the athleticism, everything. It was such a great faction, the way that everything was constructed on that. Around this time is where pay-per-view starts to start for ECW, right? Can you talk about what that was like? Because I know you guys, you're one of the guys who basically threw the title down. We talked about that, which, by the way, if anybody missed it, parts 1 and 2 with Shane, you want to go back. You guys want to check him out in the archives. We talk about that story. Phenomenal story. But Shane, you throw the title down. You're one of the flag bearers. You're one of the originators of this. We're bringing back the sport of professional wrestling. This is the era of the ECW. Now, when we're going into the next wave, this is where you guys start to take that next level jump and you hit pay-per-view. So what was it like at that time for ECW to finally start getting opportunities to work on pay-per-view, and really now you're starting to make that rise to the mainstream?
Yeah, barely legal. In 1995, the first ECW pay-per-view. We had worked so hard for it. My promos leading up to that were, that's the Nirvana land, and wrestling, that's where we need to be. And suddenly we could be available to everybody across the country and across the continent, around the world on pay-per-view. And whereas before it was like tape trading and whoever had the chance of seeing Madison Square Garden Network or Sunshine Network. So this was like the big dance for us. It really was like we had arrived. But the getting there and then, getting the contract signed, now the realization settled in, at least on my shoulders, that holy shit, now we got to do this. We cannot, whatever we do, we can't fuck up tonight. And, and that brought a bit of pressure. For the biggest problem for me, well, not for me, but I think for ECW and Barely Legal, was that vast portions of that roster had never been on pay-per-view, had never been on live television. And it's a very different beast. Like if you screw up on a taping, well, okay, we can just edit that right out. Now you're on live, brother, and there's like, what is it? Jim Ross told Sid that night, "Sorry, big boy, we're live." It's, there's no fixing it. So that, as the day wore on, that started taking its toll on the locker room. I was wrestling Anthony Durante, Pitbull number 2. And he and Francine, as it got closer and closer to bell time, they both started getting really, really nervous. Which then, in turn, as we got closer to bell time, started making me nervous because I knew I could play my role, but I wasn't so sure of myself to be able to fix it for 3 of us. And so there was a lot of that going on in the dressing room. And that pay-per-view, looking back at it, it was ECW's inaugural dance. It wasn't the greatest pay-per-view. There were some slip-ups and some flubs. And I think afterwards what that did was that allowed us to our roster, those people like Anthony and Franny and everybody else that was nervous, me included, that, okay, we can still screw up and survive to the next one. So it's not the end of the world. The cool part about Barely Legal was, and again, you would never see this today, the ECW arena, as you know, at that time, was not exactly the gem of the Schuylkill, right? It was the pretty crappy building. And so to make it somewhat telegenic, the entire crew, all of us, converged on the building a day or 2 or 3 beforehand, and everybody's painting and sweeping and cleaning up and doing everything we can to try to beautify that building as much as we could for the pay-per-view. And again, looking back, like if you would go into these promotions today, would you see that? And I'm not sure you would. You might, but again, it just speaks of that family quality that ECW had that I'd never seen before or since. So it was all hands on deck. Everybody was ready for it, but then came the day for it, and those nerves started settling in. And I think Paul, as I recall, you could tell, not that he was outwardly nervous, but you could tell Paul was quiet and not his typical self. So there was an awful lot riding on this, right? They'd put up $275,000, which was the whole shebang for ECW at that time.
Yeah.
And had that show not succeeded, had it not gotten enough viewership, that probably would have been the end, the swan song for ECW.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a great pay-per-view for me, and it's interesting you talk about it because not everything was perfect. It wasn't a perfect pay-per-view, but it was a great launching point for you guys. I look at a pay-per-view like a Hardcore Heaven 97, and to me, that was the first. I don't want to say perfect, but that was such a great pay-per-view for you guys. I felt like everything did flow. You guys had a little bit under your belt at this point. You were in the main event. Yeah. You won in a triple threat there, right? That to me was a great pay-per-view, and at that point too, now you guys are starting to have the surprises and the things that want to draw people to pay-per-view. You had Jake the Snake Roberts show up, you had Jenna Jameson show up, and different things that happened on that pay-per-view. Is there a point where you felt like you guys started to you talked about the jitters and all that stuff that people had. Is there a point where, whether it was TV, TV contract or pay-per-view or this and that, where you felt like, all right, everybody's starting to get the niche of this and we're moving forward and the product's getting better and better and better?
Oh, yeah. For me, again, I'd come through some pretty great promotions, right? I'd been to the UWF, I'd been to the NWA, WCW, WWF, and, there was always a part of ECW that, in its own way, I think in its presentation, still felt smaller stage. I mean, it was a great, great product. I'll stack up to anybody's at that time. But it still felt like, we were still working in a confined, restricted space. As the guys and ladies started to develop and started getting their niche. I talked before, I think about, the night Francine across the ring, totally unannounced and totally unspoken of. I'm in the corner with my fingers up and she just drops down and does this sultry slink across the ring. And I thought, this is incredible, perfect. I mean, like I could have ever thought of anything better for her to do. And so that's what I'm talking about. They hit that niche. When I talk about the great matches, I always talk about the autopilot, right? When you're in a great match, at some point, it just sort of happens. You're not even thinking. It's just going. And ECW had started hitting that stride. Each show you started noticing there was something special. Paul was plugging those lights out and these surprise visits with people. Earlier on in the arena, Arn Anderson shows up and Bobby Eaton shows up and different people popping in and out. And it started taking that confined space and making it a bit more cosmopolitan. It started feeling like we were growing. The thing about ECW was, at the time, I was so nose to the grindstone that I couldn't see it in the moment. I felt the growth and I saw the progress of the talent, but I was so nose to the grindstone. My mantra in my head was, can't drop the ball, can't drop the ball. So each show was like I was putting a ton of pressure on myself and not really enjoying it as much as I should have at the time. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it, but not as much as I should have, because I was fearful that next show, if we fuck up, that would be it. We were literally still, in our great infancy. So
it's like the living paycheck to paycheck thing, right? We got to get to the next one. We got to get to the next one at that point.
Yeah, if we show up next month and this building's half full, that might be it, So, but that urgency at the same time, I think, is one of the special magic ingredients that made ECW work. You've often heard me talk about no one was lazy. Everybody worked their ass off. No one shortchanged anybody in the ring. There was never any of that kind of stuff in ECW. And I believe that was part of the magic ingredient that kept that true. That, that I couldn't go out there and say, well, say work with Mikey Whipwreck, I can go out and just eat this kid up. It won't matter. No, it does matter, because Mikey's a star for ECW. So if I go out and I eat him up and just beat him, well, I beat nobody, right? But if I can make him in the process and he looks like he's got my ass beat 3 or 4 or 5 times and somehow Francine causes him to slip on a banana peel, now you've taken Mikey and put him here, and you've taken us with our heat and put us here. So there's a proper way to do this business and an improper way to do it. And I'm not suggesting that ECW, everything we did was perfect, because there were a lot of bad nights. But it seemed to me in hindsight that on the critical nights, the pay-per-views, those big shows, those ECW arena shows, that more times than not, ECW hit the grand slam than the single.
I would absolutely agree with that, Andy.
Somebody we really haven't heard you mention a lot about, because during your first run at ECW, it looks like you guys only encounter each other during the tournament for the NWA title, is Taz. You guys find yourself squaring off a lot your second go around. What was it like working with Taz, and especially during that time, because he was at the height of his popularity for your second run in ECW, and so kind of walk me through what's it like working with Taz and during that time.
Well, in the first of all, it was great. Great dance partner. For the first time around when I was there, he was still in that Tasmaniac gimmick for most of that time. So that's why we didn't really intersect in the first go around. By the time I'd returned and he had found this FTW character, right, Taz, he had a considerable amateur background and could chain his ass off. So we had that element. He also, and this little sidebar, and it segues back into this, when he went to WWF, and I watched him, I remember he had an incredible cage match with Kurt Angle. And right after that, they put him in an announcer role. And I couldn't figure it out because he just had this phenomenal match, the kind of match that, in my estimation, they needed at that time. And you've got a guy like Kurt Angle who go his ass off, right? So you need somebody like Taz, the immovable object versus the irresistible force, and suddenly you've yanked him off the chessboard and put him over behind the announce table. So I called Pete and I said, what gives? What the hell? You just have this great match. And he said, Vince said he doesn't buy me. I said, what do you mean? He said, I guess because of his stature, right? And I thought, boy, that's when I first started thinking like Vince might have lost it a bit, because he was always sharp whenever I worked for him, and prior, obviously. But there was never a time for, 3 years or better that me, Bam Bam Bigelow, Monster, and Chris Candido with Francine and Tammy, all 5 of us are backpedaling from Taz. There was never a single time in any arena we ever performed in that anybody yelled out, come on, he's short. Come on, he can kick his ass. Those fans bought Taz hook, line, and sinker. And so when you have that as a lead heel, you have that to play off of, and a guy who can go in the ring. This, for me, was like playtime, right? I know he's going to perform his part incredibly well. And all I have to do is be the big mouth that slips on the banana peel someplace. Fans are going to eat it up. So at that point, you've got all the pieces in play. Taz, and working with Taz, the only problem it wasn't a problem, it was just as soon as you talked to him, it would correct. But because Paul was building him to be such a killer, there are times, when you have to know to put that imaginary line between yourself, right? If there's 10 guys standing over in a bar, I'm not going to step up to all 10 and say, let's go, motherfucker, right? Because you're going to get your ass kicked. You're going to pick and choose your shots. And little things like that. But again, at that stage, he had never been to that main event level before. So we all had things to learn. I got more than most to learn at that point, getting to the main event. But like I said, as soon as you talk to him, he would get it and understand it and would incorporate it. And so he started knowing where to draw a line for himself. The lead-in for the angle, the precept for that, the seed for that was, as I recall, he was complaining to Paul because Paul was giving us per diem, right? So you give Paul your receipts, and he'd give you the money for the receipts. Paul would then keep the receipts, rightfully so. And Taz, as I recall, wanted the money and the receipts. He wanted the double dip. And Paul refused, and it became a pretty big issue. And Paul came to me. I remember standing there as they were going back and forth one day. I was off on the corner. Paul called me over, and he said, he's going to do his first job to you. And, which would have been great, right? I mean, it was great as it was, putting Taz over and elevating the belt. But it also would have been great to see this monster finally somehow get screwed and get stopped in his tracks. Think of Joe Louis when Schmeling beat him, right? Came back a couple years later, meaner, badder than ever. But that was the precept for it. And so for me as the performer, the big mouth, for a year and a half leading into the build-up to that match in Kissimmee, I'm doing this from Taz, backpedaling, and he's beating me in under 3 minutes for the TV title and all these things. So now the week of that match in Kissimmee, Paul calls me and leaves a message on my phone and says, I have an idea. Call me back. Well, at the time he owed me, I think it was like 50-some, 60,000. It was a lot of money. And I thought, without that belt, I've got zero leverage. And so I called Paul all week long. Called, left a message, no call back. I was set to fly down Saturday to Kissimmee, and Friday night I called Paul around, I think it was around 9:45 or so, and I said, I'm going to wait till 10 o'clock. If I don't hear from him, I'm going to the bar to get tore up drunk, and I won't be there tomorrow. So 10 o'clock came, I got in my car, drove over to a place called Riverside, and started proceeding to get tore up drunk, right? About midnight, Paul calls. And I answered it, heard his voice, and hung up. Kept calling back. About the fifth or sixth call, I answer it, and he says, are you going to keep hanging up, or are you going to listen to me? And I should have hung up on him, right? But I said, you got 30 seconds, and he started talking. He ended up talking to me till daylight, like 6 hours till the sun was coming up.
Damn.
why would I screw you? You're my champion. I have no reason, all that kind of stuff. And so I got on the plane and I flew down. My driver picked me up at the Orlando airport. As we're pulling out of the airport, Paul calls. So I answer the phone and he said, I have a question for you. Is this about you doing a job or is this about you doing a job to Taz? And remember, I'm the guy that suggested Beulah McGillicuddy pin me. So I don't have the problem doing a job, never did. I understand my business. And it so pissed me off. I said, where are you? He said, I'm at the Marriott. And I look, and the Marriott is like right on the side of the road. Now we're on the toll road, right? So I reach over and grab the steering wheel right before the toll booths. And we veer the car. The driver's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? I veer the car back when we get off. I'm going to go in there and whoop his ass. I'm so pissed. After all I'd done for him, and quite frankly, he did for me, but to ask a professional that kind of question to me just didn't sit well, especially after kissing my ass for 6 hours on the phone last night. So I walk into the Marriott. Francine, Bubba, Ron and Charlie, our production staff, several of the guys were sitting in the lobby. And I asked what room Paul was in, and Bubba gave me the room number because he was supposed to go meet with him. I walk up, and the door is propped open, with the bar. So I knock on the door, and he said, come on in. I guess that was Bubba. So I walk in. He's in the shower. So my driver and I walk in, and we sit down. And I had already spoken to my lawyer about my concerns of the money that I was owed. And he told me to drop a personal IOU from Paul to you, which I did. And he said, get him to sign it. So he came out of the bathroom and his eyeballs about popped out in his head. I guess he thought Bubba was sitting there. And, I said, you got a lot of fucking nerve. And he started by apologizing and everything else. And right then I take the IOU out and hand it to him. And he signed it, no problem. So that put my guard down a bit. And again, I was concerned I'm not getting screwed out of this money. So the next day, everybody's heading down to the building, and something in my gut wasn't right. It just didn't feel right. And it took me several hours to get ready to finally get in the car and drive myself down. And I got in the parking lot at the building, and I just couldn't get out of the car. So I sat there, and over time, I remember Tammy and Chris walked by, and we talked, and Axel walked by, and we talked. Bam Bam stopped by, and we talked. And I finally arrived at the conclusion. I said, nothing with Taz. It had zero to do with Taz. I knew Paul was fucking me. And so I pulled out and drove to an Applebee's or a TGIF or something. And Bam Bam called, and he said, the conversation went on for some time, and he said, do you really want to screw the fans? And I surely didn't. So that's what got me back to the car, and I drove back to the building. And when I pulled in and walked in, they had a security guy inside, and he's going, "I'm not allowed on this side of the building. You got to go this way." So, of course, me being the asshole, I pushed his arm out of the way and wouldn't go this way, right? And got over this. I just wanted to be in a dressing room by myself. I couldn't be around other people at that point. And I hear a pounding on the door. I yell, "Go away!" And I hear Terry phone going, "Well, goddamn, Shane, it's me. It's Terry." I jumped up and go over the door. Right? I locked the door. And he comes in, and we talked for quite a while. And then Francine came over, and I wouldn't let Franny in. Again, nothing with Francine. I just, out of respect for Terry, but, I couldn't do it for anybody else. And then Taz came over, and we went out in the hall and spoke. And I told him, and he asked me point blank. He said, "Is this about doing a job?" I said, "Bro, come on, man." I said, I let you beat me in 3 minutes. Do you really think that's what this is? And I told him about the money Paul owed me. And as soon as I told him that, he got it. He knew where I was coming from. And, Taz, I see some of the banter out there about Taz and some of the blowback. But I got to say, Taz is a 100% pro. He's going to go out there and he's going to give you everything he's got, which he did that night. He listened like a champ, right? I can't say anything negative about Taz's in-ring performances or about him personally. We get along great. So at that point, the not screwing the fans part that Bam Bam had said, it turned inside my head. The talk I had with Terry churned inside my head. But then the competitive juices started flowing, getting in front of that audience and giving them this match that I know Taz and I could give them. And that really was how it built up. But I see a lot of stuff about Taz, like from certain fans and stuff, saying certain boys in the business saying he's hard to work with or whatever. I never experienced any of that. For me, Taz was really a night off working with a great dance partner.
Yeah. I mean, again, there was such a special dynamic between you guys. At this point, you were the longest reigning ECW champion of all time. Your fourth reign, you're over 400 plus days. I don't know the exact number. There you go. The exact number. There we go. Andy, Stat Guy Andy over here. Stat Guy Reds.
Who knew?
406 days ECW champion. You start to wind down here. I know you have some injury issues too towards kind of the end of your tenure at ECW. Yeah. What takes you to WCW? What makes is it? Do you see the writing on the wall that's happening with ECW, and you make your decision at that point to make a decision for yourself, or was there other reasoning why?
No, I thought I'd ride ECW into my retirement. I didn't see myself ever going anyplace else, especially after that 95 sojourn to hell, right? For me, I always figured my career would end there. So when I walked out of the building that night, I remember Bob Ryder and Dave, another writer from the Philadelphia area. I apologize, I'm brain parts with names anymore. But they were sitting, and they wanted comment. I said, no comment. And then I went out later to Bob Ryder and I said, I'll call you and give you, the exclusive interview. So during that week, we had an ECW arena show the next week where Paul wanted me to come back and do a rematch with Taz. And, the thought being that, well, Shane's always been champion. He's going to get the belt back. This is just a gimmick. And, I wanted to work with him again because the first one was so fun. And or that world title match was so fun. And so when I went back, Paul had always told me he forbade me from cutting my hair, never wanted me to dress like Flair, dress up. He always wanted me to be the franchise character. So in just my own little personal protest, I cut the ponytail off and went there wearing a fedora, the dress shirt and tie and everything. It was just sort of my thank you, Paul, right? And Taz and I went and tore it down again in the ECW arena the next week. But the WCW segue, first of all, I never expected the door would be open to either company because I had been pretty verbose about both of them and my feelings about them. Dusty Rhodes, Mike Tenay had again played into this equation, called me up and said, did you hear Dusty was on my show last night? I said, no. He said, I really think you need to go back and listen to that. So I went back and listened to it, and Mike was bringing names up to Dusty, and he said, what about Shane Douglas? And Dusty thought for a second. He said, Shane Douglas is the Ric Flair of his generation. Mm-hmm. And, they're between Dusty and I. And so I called Dusty to thank him. And the funny part about this is you guys will get a kick out of this if Dusty at all. He answered the phone. I said, Dusty, Shane Douglas. He goes, how'd you get this number? And, so we talked, and he was very gracious, and he was at that time working on the booking committee with WCW. And he said, at the end of the conversation, he said, do you mind if I bring your name up at a production meeting? I said, no, do whatever you want, and that opened the door. Not a matter of days later, Eric Bischoff called and offered a pretty prodigious contract, which at that time, remember now, at this point, I was like $144,000 all told. That is the $70,000 that I was owed directly from Paul and $70,000 that I had put out of pocket promoting my towns for ECW. And so that would have put me in bankruptcy. If I couldn't get another job, that would have immediately put me in bankruptcy. So for me, the contract that WCW and Eric Bischoff offered me was a lifesaver. It really saved my financial life. And not that I wanted to go to WCW. There was none of that. But I really was interested in what Bischoff had said. He said that he wanted to be the one that brought Ric Flair and Shane Douglas to television. Mm-hmm. So when I went to WCW, signed the contract, and there was some lag in between. I took my ex-wife on a 3-week cruise because I knew I was going to be tied up for the next 3 years. And on the way back, when we got to Miami, they were in that following Monday, they were in Jacksonville. So I thought, well, let's just stay in Florida for a couple extra days and sort of wander our way up the state and just pop in, say hello to everybody, talk to Flair, just sort of dabble your toes in a bit to let everybody know you're excited. So when I walked into the Jacksonville Arena that night, I remember Sandman was off to my right with Peaches, and Mikey was straight ahead of me. Well, they, of course, came right over and we started talking. And everybody in the backstage area instantly went quiet. And I knew that Flair had walked in behind. I didn't see him, but I could feel him there, right? So I said, Rick, before I turned around, there he is right behind me. Well, Rick, being the uber politician, sees all these people looking and knows that he's got to shake my hand, right? So he reaches out and shakes my hand. And he goes to walk away, and I didn't let go of his hand. And I pulled him back, and I said, Rick, I think you and I should talk, don't you? And he looked around again, and he said, yeah, give me 15, 20 minutes to get settled in. So I went down to catering to get some coffee, and I intentionally took like 45 minutes. I wanted him to think about it, but I also wanted it to be a serious discussion. Because I was then, and I'm even more now convinced that had Ric Flair brought his A game into that angle and I brought my A game, that we could have in some way helped start steering those ratings back to WCW.
Right.
Let's face it, Flair's a special ring performer, and I ain't bad. So, I was certain of that. And knocked on the door. He told me to come in. I can still see him. He had one boot tied, was lacing the other boot, his under tights and a T-shirt on. And he jumped up and he came over and he put his hand out. He said, I just want to start by saying I'm sorry. And I chuckled. I said, I don't accept that, Rick, because I know you're not serious. You're not being faithful with that. And like you would know I wasn't if I said that back to you.
Right.
And we sat down and we talked for some time. And I said, I told him, I said, I fervently believe that you and I can help turn the tide for WCW. Let's face it, every wrestling fan in the country knew that we hated each other's guts. And the one thing that was really lacking in the business at that time was any legitimacy. It was all going to cartoon land. And suddenly you bring the iconic performer of his generation with one from my generation and throw us in the ring together. How can it go wrong? And so we shook hands on it, and I squeezed his hand. I said, I'm going to hold you to that. I said, are you man enough to uphold your end of this angle? And he said, yes, sir. Yes, I am. I said, I'm going to hold you to that. Walked out. Later found out from multiple sources that starting that day, he had gone to the brass in WCW and started undermining me.
Started politicking. And again, we now have the luxury of hindsight, right? We're not in the moment. I always talk about history being current, so you got to look through a lens from that day, so a contemporary lens. But now we have the luxury of hindsight. We can look back and see exactly the outcome. Mm-hmm. I believe that it was around that time that WCW's death started. They started their death spiral around that time. Because you had that Millionaires Club later, yes, and those factions in that politics. Let's face it, Hogan wasn't a bad politician himself, but you go back and you look at the new blood that was there, right? Vampiro and Billy Kidman and Benoit and Malenko and Guerrero and Ray and Conan and so many great performers. It was time for that generation who had made theirs and made wrestling what it was. It was time for them not to disappear, just take a step back and give the platform to this new generation of incredible performers that were coming. And look at what that generation that I just mentioned did in the next 20 years in the business. But this is when WCW's death spiral started. Yeah, I would agree with you. And, it's something my dad has always said, right? We're big baseball fans. And, if you look at 10 years ago, you had guys playing to 37, 38 years old. Different game. Times change. Youth must be served. It's something my dad always says. No matter the industry, at some point, youth must be served. And WCW had hit that point. They hit the wall. We've seen it a million times. We couldn't see any more Hogan and Nash feuds and any of that stuff. And again, one of the things that I think at WWE had done really well at that time was they utilized the mid-card really well, when I felt like WCW kind of, they were throwing, the old guard out there as the main event and not utilizing the mid-card very well. we know what the end game was with WCW. So you've done a lot of independent stuff, and since then, because we're gonna be wrapping up in a few minutes, so I want to kind of circle it back here. I want to talk just kind of what you've been doing, because you still work the independents. I've seen you at House of Hardcore a few times. I know that you're still doing some shows. Listen, if you want to go out and see the franchise, he's still got it. I tell you that right now. If anybody's watching it, and a
little bit less than used to, but
you still got it though, brother. You still got it. Some people have it. It never goes away. But can you talk about now in kind of I don't know, it's the twilight. I don't know when you want to step away. That's your decision to make. But you're still contributing to the business. You also have your podcast that you're doing right now. Just talk about everything talk about what your life's like now in the wrestling industry and personally, how you feel at this point in your life with your career.
Yeah, for me now, it's a lot of fun, right? I take the bookings I want, don't have to take the bookings I don't want. Can sort of, decide when I go on the road and not go on the road. But I won't lie to you. It's harder now than it's ever been. I could go out. I've learned enough in the ring. I could go out and walk and talk and, take the easier route. But, and again, I don't perform anywhere near the level I used to. But I do try to give the fans at least a snippet and a taste of what the franchise was. The humbling part and the really ingratiating part is, almost nightly, someone will come to the merchandise table and you know exactly where they're going with it. A guy or a woman will come walking up with a smaller child, either kid or grandkid, and they'll say something like, "Hey, this is the guy I was showing you," and they'll say, "You're my favorite wrestler." And I'm thinking, my God, anything you watch to me is probably 20 plus years old. But this computer stuff, these things they call computer thingies, right? I think they're going to give some life to everything because we're now all perpetually young. You can watch us 100 years from now, still from the ECW arena, and see a 30-year-old franchise. But for me, I have an absolute love affair with professional wrestling. It's why I didn't go to medical school and I worked my ass off to get there. It's why I didn't stay in teaching, which I hated. It's why I should preface that hated working with the administrators that had holes in their heads.
I get it.
Yeah, I thoroughly love teaching kids, but I have an absolute love affair with wrestling. I have since I was 6 years old. I've always found it to be magic. Whenever I watched Bruno Sammartino, Harley Race, Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes. I mean, go down the list of all, and I'm going to miss a gazillion names, but as a young kid watching these guys and women, you'd sit there and watch. It was, if it was a 10-minute match, it was 10 minutes of magic. 10 minutes and forget the rest of the world, man, because I'm watching Bruno Sammartino. Wrestling has always been, from that youngest day, first time I saw it at 6, 7 years old, something that just hooked me in. That really grabbed my attention and kept me wrapped. So for me now, at this stage of my career, what I'm really enjoying about is, going on the road. There's something that just in the process of going on the road, takes you back. But seeing at the independents, I wouldn't want to work for a large company right now, an AEW, WWE or somebody else. Because to me, that's when it sort of loses. It becomes now a job for them, right? And so they're there making their paycheck and they're doing what they're told, and nobody's pushing the envelope or the boundaries. When you go to the independents, nobody's there for the paycheck. They're there because that 6-year-old Troy Martin in New Brighton, Pennsylvania, all those years ago. They're there for the same reason. They have a love affair with wrestling. They want to create something. None of them, much like I didn't or Mick didn't at that time, have the belief that you can even get into the business, let alone have a career or leave a mark on the business. So you see that in the young men and women in the business today, that hunger and that eye of the tigers, they call it, that oomph to want to go and try. Because, again, nobody's getting rich there, but you see everybody working their asses off. And they're eager to come back and have you detail their match. Okay, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? Nobody's going, Shane, you were great, but that was a long time ago, and the business is different, so I don't need any input from you. I see so much of myself in these kids, because if I were this kid at these independent shows and there was a Shane Douglas on there, I'd be a pain in his ass, right? I'd be a dingleberry on his backside. Can you tell me that? And that's what I love about it. It keeps my brain perpetually young in the business to want to keep going. There's never a time I get to a show and I feel like I'm at work. To me, this is fun. This is time to hang out, time to go out and have fun with the crowd. And and just continue having fun doing it. And I've always said that's always been my personal litmus test. As long as I'm having fun doing it, if it ever stops becoming fun, that's when it stops for me. But I put it in perspective. I wrestle far fewer times per month now than I used to, and I need the time to recuperate to be able to go out there and do it again. It does hurt. It's not as easy as it used to be, but I do enjoy it. I love it. And to me, I see the magic side of it with the fans. That you look at these independent shows as the WWE and WCW. We're all familiar with their numbers, and yet you see like Appalachian Championship Wrestling here that Chris runs, outdoor shows that typically would draw 40 or 50 people. Like say Buffalo Wild Wings outside, day show. He's been drawing 200-300 people to these shows. And so there's something in the events that are bringing these people back. I think in part turned off of what they're seeing on TV, in part wanting to relive something that when they were a kid, I always say nostalgia is a powerful opiate. And it's drawing, and it's compelling, and it's fun. And you're seeing a dressing room full of men and women that are eager like I was eager at that same age. So it's still a shitload of fun.
And that's what we love to hear. And I mean, again, you're such a guy. You're a guy who's experienced so much, contributed so much to the business. There's so much knowledge that you can share. And again, for us as fans, we love to see, even if it's a snippet of it, the franchise come out there and give us a little bit of that magic. It hasn't gone away. Before we let you go, I got 2 quick hitter questions, and Andy has a quick hitter question. So, my quick hitter question: Roman Reigns is a heel. Are you a fan of Roman Reigns right now, or are you not buying in?
Yeah, no, I again, full disclosure, I scantily watch, don't watch week to week. The stuff that I do watch is typically for the podcasts, so I can comment on it in a learned way. I've said all along that Roman was a heel. I remember Bill Watts saying to me, you're a goddamn stone cold, when I was Ricky's partner. And I saw the same thing in Roman, especially when they were so swimming upstream trying to make him babyface and get over with the crowd. But Paul being with him, right? I mean, that's invaluable. You spoke earlier about Paul's special qualities, and having him at ringside with Roman is fantastic for him. But I see in Roman something more coming out. When you're a babyface and you're trying to get a crowd to react and they're just not buying it, at some point you just go, fuck it. I've tried everything. But when you're a heel, there's always a way. I've always said it's a lot easier to make people hate you than it is to make you like them, make them like you. And so with Roman, it seems like he's taken to being a heel. That said, the every one of those in the Samoan family, I've never seen any put boots on or go to the ring barefoot. I should say put tights on and not get it right there. It's like in their DNA. Yep. And so, you see the match that he had with his cousin. Help me out.
Jey Uso.
Uso, there you go. Again, chair shots. But when you see, that match to me was fun to watch. That was compelling and it drew you in. And I think that was prefaced off the fact that he's playing the heel role. So I always said that and always thought that he should be a heel. And I'm enjoying what I do see of him being a heel right now. And again, with Paul at ringside, how could you miss?
Absolutely. Agree or disagree. It's all I need. Cody Rhodes will be one of the most important figures of this generation in pro wrestling. Agree, disagree?
Agree. And I'll qualify it. Agree because A, of his pedigree, right? Being Dusty, again, like the DNA, right? You grew up in that household. How could you not pick it up? But I think, like we all have a little bit of a learning experience. You know, the recent back and forth about the focus groups and stuff, I think he learned a little bit on. You know, what I've learned is with these cameras in our faces and this thingy called the computer thingy, don't go on the internet and don't go on the World Wide Web and say A, B, and C if you're not certain of A, B, and C, because rest assured someone out there's going to go, hey, franchise, you're wrong on B and here's why. So make sure you don't just willy-nilly throw comments out there like that, because it does in some way gives a bruise to the company. But the thing about Cody is he has composure and poise. And that's something that you really can't teach. When you put a microphone in his hand and you see the way he has this love affair with the camera. And if you can do that, you're not having a love affair with the camera, you're having a love affair with everybody that's watching at home. And he knows how to transcend through that camera, much like MJF does, right, for different reasons. But every generation needs that figurehead and that mouthpiece. Cody certainly seems like he can be that for his generation.
Totally agree. This is the most important question that we've had of all 3 episodes. This is 3 weeks in the making, and we saved this question so Andy could ask it. Mr.
Okay.
Ritz, ask the question, sir.
You have alluded to being a comic book fan, so I have to ask you the age-old question between me and my friends: Batman or Superman?
Batman.
Oh, good one. Actually, neither. Thor for me. I was a Marvel guy. Yes, I was a Marvel guy. Look, I love the Batman character. To an extent, I love it. Let's face it. Just a utility belt of stuff. If somebody comes along and tries to shoot you, sooner or later you're going to be shot dead. To me, I love that the superhuman aspect of it. Like with Marvel, you look at Spider-Man, right? And Spider-Man, not as in the movies, but in the comic books, had to create. He was a science geek and had to create the web shooters and stuff. And he wasn't impervious. He had some spider-like qualities. But there was something, much like in wrestling. I told Taz, there's a reason that Superman has kryptonite. Because if not, then here's Superman. Here's this month's heel. Superman wins. There has to be a chink in the armor, and all the Marvel characters have some chink in the armor. Superman, without the kryptonite, is pretty much impervious to everything. Right. But Batman, I like the brooding aspect. The character stuff of the Batman character. But I was a Marvel guy, and I don't know if it's because when I started becoming a mark for comic books, Marvel was really on the upswing in those mid 70s. I've got a crate full of comic books at my house that go back from 20 cents, a few 15 centers, but the 25-cent Starburst, up in the corner. That was whenever I could get 4 for $1 with my weekly allowance, which was $2. So I could get 8 comic books and sit there and read in the shade when it was hot for a couple of good hours and really soak it in.
Very cool.
That's great. And by the way, if we're going Batman, so it's Batman. But for me, it's Captain America. I'm a Marvel guy as well. But the greatest villain of all time, I don't care what anybody says, it's the Joker. Nobody beats the Joker. Greatest villain of all time in any comic. Yeah,
but let me ask you now. Is that based off of the comic books or is that based off of Jack Nicholson's characterization?
It's the comic books. It's the cartoons that they've put out. It's for me, the iteration of the Joker in every facet. You can even go back to the old Adam West shows. To me, it was always the most compelling character.
Caesar Romero.
As a heel, there was never a bigger villain, a more believable villain to me than the Joker.
Yeah. And the reason I just watched the Joker with Joaquin Phoenix night before last down in Charlotte.
Talk about creating like some sentiment behind the character. Like, damn, I just want him to be evil. Now you look at it, you're like, I kind of get it. You know what? I guess I get why he's a little crazy.
Yeah. And that makes a great heel. When a heel can start to explain themselves, that's a great heel.
There it is. And you guys, that's from the legend, Shane Douglas. Listen, this was a great time. And Shane, thank you so much for joining us over the last few weeks, covering 2 holidays at this point. We're so happy that we had you on. We appreciate it, and we hope to see you back here in the Philadelphia area, maybe at Icons of Wrestling. I'm hoping for in September, so I can stop by and say hello. But we want to thank you so much for your time, Shane. We really appreciate it. We want to thank everybody out there that watched this. If you missed our interviews with Tony Atlas and Cowboy Bob Orton, also we had D'Lo Brown on recently. Go back in our archives. You can see Ken Shamrock, Candice Michelle, Larry Zabisco. We've had so many people on here, and we're so appreciative of that. And we got to say thank you and pay the bills to our sponsors. Andy, who we loving again?
So we're loving today Body Check Wellness. They are a line of products that promote wellness, balance, and recovery by using the full potential of hemp. They come in extracts, blends, and gummies. Make sure you're using code A2D in the checkout for 20% off your order at bodycheckwellness.com. Dr. Paul Vidal at Specialized Physical Therapy. He's our doc. Make him yours. Check him out right there on the web, specializedphysicaltherapy.com, or at his locations at Burlington and Cherry Hill, New Jersey. If you're looking to buy or sell a home, changing career, or brokerage, contact Alan Foy of eXp Realty, 302-682-8820, or visit him at alan.foy@exprealty.com. The Counseling Center in Sunrise Detox. If you need help with mental health or addiction issues, give them a call at 856-651-8117. And then we would also be remiss if we didn't talk about All Campus, who's giving 20% off everything in our store, including hats, shirts, and our team cornhole sets to all our subscribers.
Yeah, lots of great stuff going on here at A2D. Wonderful guests like Shane Douglas and so many others that we've had here. And again, Shane, we thank you for your time. Happy 4th of July, my friend. I get to wish you a happy whatever on 2 holidays. This is a great time.
Happy birthday to America, everybody. Have a great weekend, man. Good being with you guys again.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. And I'm very thrilled that I get to do this with you here, Shane. It's been a long time coming, but for myself, for Annie, this is our own little triple threat we have here.
Oh, yeah.
We appreciate you guys. Happy 4th of July. Safe. Be great. Take care. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And have a great weekend.
And guys, I got to plug it. Tonight, in this very ring, 9:30 Central, 10:30 Eastern. We're not talking wrestling. We're finally doing it. It is our Star Wars show. So make sure you guys are coming back later tonight to check it out. It's going to be phenomenal. Oh, shut up. You're the Disney nerd. How do you do that?
I watch Goofy over watching Jabba the Hutt all day. I don't care. Whatever.
God.
But I love the Joker, right? It's so weird.
Mark Hamill was the Joker in the animated series. Give me something.
That's what I know him for.
All right, fair enough. I'll take it. I got to go to work. Let's go.
Guys, great show.
Guys.
Again, yeah, thank you, Shane. Great to have you on. Andy, thank you so much for
you.
producing.
Always.
Great interview. Everybody take care. Happy 4th of July. Be safe. Make smart decisions. Don't drive. If you're drinking, take an Uber. Do whatever you got to do. Be safe. Get a ride. And take care.